Riccardo Fedel. Riccardo Fedel, 23 August 1906 – 12 June 1944, also known by his nom de guerre Libero, was an Italian anti-fascist, communist political fighter, and partisan leader. Born into an aristocratic family on his mother's side, he became a lifelong anti-fascist from an early age. He enlisted in the volunteer army in 1923 in Modena, becoming a sergeant. He was discharged in December 1925 following a failed anti-fascist action in Ravenna. His political actions brought him numerous prison sentences. He became the subject of regular government surveillance for over 20 years and earned a police dossier as being a subversive and dangerous communist. After the Italian Armistice in September 1943, he became commander of the Garibaldi Brigade Romagna until his death in April 1944. Family and early life. Riccardo Giovanni Battista Fedel was born in Gorizia, at that time part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, on 23 August 1906, in an aristocratic family. His mother was Augusta Badallo, daughter of a Venetian patriot. Her brother Charles Badallo was a mining engineer who had emigrated to South America. She married Biagio Fedel, a wine merchant from Istria, with whom she had two children, Riccardo born 1906 and Etta born 1908. In 1912, his father Biagio died whilst journeying to Buenos Aires, attempting to reach his wife's brother Charles in South America. As a result, the family's economic conditions worsened progressively, and a year later the family sold all its properties in Istria, Gorizia, and moved to Milan. In 1915, during World War I, the family received the status of ethnic Italian refugees from the Austro-Hungarian Empire and stayed in Milan, where Riccardo completed elementary school and attended the Boys' Technical College in Tortona. During school holidays, Richard visited the villa of Count Gustav Sorenzo, an ancient Venetian noble family in Mestre. The count was his great-uncle from his mother's family, the Boscase. It was during one of these holidays that Riccardo at 13 joined the Italian fascist movement and remained a member until 1923. However, at 17 he changed his political views and became a communist, and in 1923 enlisted in the volunteer army. He attended the military academy of Modena, becoming a sergeant. He was discharged in December 1925 following a failed anti-fascist action in Ravenna, became the subject of police surveillance, and earned a police dossier as being a subversive and dangerous communist. Political activity 1920s–1930s. He was later arrested by security police for allegedly being involved with handling illegal weapons in Venice harbor, for which he was sentenced to 6 months in prison. He was then arrested again in October 1926. Under the recently introduced laws, fascisticide capable of organizing attacks against Benito Mussolini, and sentenced to 3 years in prison. He was in political exile at Pantelleria from November 1926 to March 1927, and then in Ustica until October 1927, when he was conditionally released on grounds of poor health and extorted testimony against other fellow prisoners. After prison, he returned to the Veneto, where the family lived, and was recruited as an agent by the Black Shirts Militia for National Security (MVSN) and sent into service in Gorizia. After a short stay, he felt unable to work with the organization there, and after denouncing the leaders of the MVSN, he was fired and sent back to Mestre. However, he continued to pretend to be an agent of the militia, whilst printing and distributing subversive communist leaflets in Pordenone, calling for a strike of the textile workers. This action triggered a strong reaction by the chief of police, a fascist, and he was once again imprisoned for another 3 years. He was sent to the province of Potenza from 1928 until 1930 and in 1931 to Tremiti to serve out his sentence. By proxy he married Anita Piosin, the daughter of an anarchist union leader and author of the Statute of the Bakers' Union from Mestre, who was allowed to join him in prison until she became pregnant and returned to Venice to give birth. He tried to escape to reach his wife after the birth of the eldest son Luciano, but was caught and sentenced to more than 14 months in prison, which he served in Avellino. During his detention, his son Luciano died just a few months old. Back in Veneto once again, he came under political surveillance, which he tried to evade, serving another 6 months' imprisonment in Brescia for the falsification of documents. His wife by this stage persuaded him to give up his political activity for the family's sake. A second son had been born in the meantime, named Luciano after the eldest, who had died, and in 1936 they had a third son, George. He took a position with the publisher Edvardo Sanzogno of Milan, which allowed him to maintain a family life. In 1939, he was called up for service in the army and returned with his family to Veneto. In 1940, Italy entered the war against the Allies, and he returned to political activity, now more experienced and mature. He was able to facilitate group actives of anti-fascist propaganda in factories and barracks between Mestre, Padua, and Treviso. Despite being under surveillance, he was able to avoid arrest. In 1942, he was sent to Montenegro with the 120th Reg. Infantry Emilia Division. In Herceg-Novi, in the Bay of Cotter, he met Arrigo Boldrini, with whom he was to resume political contact later. The Italian Armistice, September 1943. Fedel returned to Italy in 1943, resuming his propaganda campaign, and with other like-minded Italian soldiers, and helped many to escape deportation. After the armistice was declared on 8 September, he went to Ravenna to get reacquainted with Arrigo Boldrini, codenamed Bilo. On 11 September, he attended a meeting with other communist leaders at the Romagna Hotel Mare, Pinta di Milano Marittima. The group included Arrigo Boldrini, Mario Gordini, Gino Gatta, Giuseppe D'Alema, Ennio Cervolotti, John Fosconi, Agis Samaritans, Rodolfo Salvagini, and Virginio Zoffoli. It was agreed that Riccardo Fedel would be responsible for setting up a partisan group in the Apennines. This was a time of great uncertainty in Italy, with numerous political factions working against each other. In addition, the presence of the German army in retreat, seeking escaping Allied prisoners of war and taking revenge on partisan and civilian groups. 1943–1944, resistance, and the Garibaldi Brigade Romagna. Between September and October was a period of poor organization. By November 1943, the group began moving the partisan activity into the Apennines around Finzo, with the task of bringing together small and isolated partisan groups in the area. Then Fedel, codenamed Libero, was ordered by the military committee of the Communist Party to the west of Galata to organize the newly formed Brigade Garibaldi Adriatic, linking up with the Savior partisan group headed by Salvatore Oria, codenamed Julius. Within a few months of his arrival, the partisan group increased from 40 to more than 1,000 men, with Oria taking on the role of a political commissar. On 1 December 1943, the Garibaldi Brigade Romagna 8, Brigade Garibaldi Romagno, was officially established under the leadership of Libero, and by February 1944 the first partisan Republic of Italy had been established, known as the Department of Dogwood. During the winter of 1943/4, this partisan group helped dozens of Allied prisoners to escape to Allied lines. Amongst the many they helped were some senior, high-profile British officers and an air marshal who had been imprisoned in Castello di Vinsiglia, PF-12 near Florence. They included Lieutenant General Sir Philip Neame, General Sir Richard Nugent O'Connor, Lieutenant Colonel John Frederick Boyce Kamea, Brigadier Edward Joseph Todhunter, Air Marshal Owen Tudor Boyd, Major General Michael Gambier Parry, Second Lieutenant Lord Dan Ranfurly, Daniel Knox, 6th Earl of Ranfurly, Brigadier Douglas Arnold. All were successfully repatriated with the Allies between Christmas 1943 and May 1944. At the end of March 1944, the brigade became a division of 3 brigades, the Romagna Brigade Group, under the command of Hilary Tabaro Pietro Mori, with Libero head of staff. Then, in early April, the Volkssturm Panzer Division 1 Hermann Göring, together with departments of CSR, began a comprehensive round-up of partisan groups in which they suffered heavy casualties. It was during this period that Riccardo Fedel met his death. After his so-called disappearance, Hilary Tabaro, with the help of Guglielmo Marconi, commander of the 2nd Brigade, and Bruno Velati, an expert in sabotage, who had been dropped by the Allies, began rebuilding the brigade. Events leading to Libero's death. In January, the head of the military committee Romagna, Antonio Carini, codenamed Bears, went up into the mountains to check on the situation of the brigade, as the reports seemed inconsistent with the provisions of the Front National. There appears to have been numerous petty disputes amongst themselves over political issues and so-called directives. For example, the arrangement that Libero had agreed to replace the red star of the partisans' caps with a tricolor cockade. This had to be balanced against giving the brigade commanders a free hand. There were also issues about contact with the Allies and airdrops. This came to a head in early April, when an order was made for Libero to make contact with a Tuscany partisan group that was eager to form a new brigade. On the 3rd and 5 April, there was airdrops by the Allies, previously agreed with Libero, in selected areas of the Apennines. The drop, it was claimed, was to include £1 or £2 million. This is where the information becomes confused. The partisan group that was designated to retrieve the money was called back to base, with the effect that Libero was accused of embezzling the money illegally. It was said that to avoid argument he gave it to Guglielmo Marconi, but refused to report to codenamed Cloak. There then appears to have been a German roundup of some of the Romagna Brigade partisans, whilst Libero seemed to have disappeared. A death sentence was handed down by a partisan court tried in absentia against him for desertion and disobedience, attempted misappropriation, attempted insubordination, and illegal communications with the enemy. Judgment was performed by a detachment of the 29th GAP, whose members were all subsequently killed by the Nazis. There is much controversy, as well as conflicting versions about the circumstances and events surrounding the last few weeks before his death. In May 1944, Angelo Giovanetti, codenamed the Moor, in a paper to the military committee of the province of Ravenna, indicates that Libero is kept isolated in area of Servia, soon to be subjected to an interrogation, compelling and hard. Giovanetti also noted that the police fascist seeks him, and, if he fell into their hands, it would be a serious threat to the organization. 30. According to oral testimony, Riccardo Fedel Libero was killed by a hail of gunfire in early June 1944. However, the date and place of the killing remains unknown, and his body was never recovered. Riccardo Fedel was officially reported missing as a soldier, SOE Special Operations Executive, and in Italy 1940–1946. During World War II, Italy was both an enemy country and supposedly a monolithic fascist state with no organized opposition which SOE could use, and therefore made little effort in Italy before September 1943, when Mussolini's government collapsed and signed an armistice with the Allies, who had by this time already occupied Sicily. Amongst the many other clandestine British secret services was a department known as MINI. It worked to train the armed forces in escape and evasion. Evasion lines were set up in occupied countries. Both services, together with commando units such as Popski's private army attached to the British 8th Army in Italy, trained and supplied the various Italian partisan groups between 1943 and 1940. Late in 1943, SOE established a base at Bari in southern Italy in conjunction with the American OSS Office of Strategic Services, from which they operated their intelligence networks and agents in the Balkans. In the aftermath of the Italian collapse, SOE helped build a large resistance organization in the cities of northern Italy and in the Alps. Italian partisans harassed German forces in Italy throughout the autumn and winter of 1944. When the German retreat beyond Rome began, instructions were given over SOE wireless telegraphy W/T links, and by BBC broadcast signals to the partisan groups in the Apennines to begin their attacks on 16 specified road and rail targets. Most of these assignments were accomplished successfully. One of the original partisan leaders, Garibaldi, codenamed Bilo, who led the ex-XVIF Garibaldi Brigade, was the partisan force which liberated Ravenna on December 4, 1944, with the approval of the Allied forces. In the spring 1945 offensive in Italy, they captured Genoa and other cities unaided by Allied forces. Sources and further reading: Playing with Strife, The Autobiography of a Soldier, Lt. General Sir Philip Neame V.C., KBCB, DSO, George G. Harrap and Company. Limited, 1947, 353 pages, written whilst a POW in Castello di Vinciglia to Campo PG-12, and his escape in 1943 with the help of Italian partisans and enemy officers. The Last Days of Mussolini, Ray Mosley, Sutton Publishing Limited, 2006, ISBN 0-7509-4449-8. War, Massacre, and Recovery in Central Italy, 1943–1948, Victoria Belko, A History of Contemporary Italy, Society and Politics, Paul Ginsborg. War in Italy, 1943–1945, 1994, A Brutal Story, Richard Lamb, St. Martin's Press, New York, 328 pages. ISBN 978-312-11093-2. Special Force, SOE and the Italian Resistance, 1943–1945. Malcolm Tudor, Amelia Publishing, 2004. ISBN 0-9538964-20. Beyond the Wire, A True Story of Allied POW in Italy, 1943–1945, Malcolm Tudor. To War with Whitaker, 1994, The Wartime Diaries of the Countess of Ranfurly, 1939–1945, Hermione Ranfurly, William Heinemann Limited, London, 375 pages. ISBN 0-434-224-0. The War in Italy, 1943–1945, True Adventures in Enemy Territory, Malcolm Tudor. Prisoners and Partisans, Escape and Evasion in World War Roman II Italy, Malcolm Tudor. Mission Accomplished. SOE and Italy, 1943–1945, 2011. David Stafford. The Bodley Head, 415, ISBN 978-1-84792-65-2. Enemy Escape and Evasion, 1939–1945, MRD Foote. And J. M. Langley, The Bodley Head, London, 1979. 200,000 Heroes, Italian Partisans and the American OSS in WW2, Leon Weckstein, L.R. Publishing, United States, 2011. ISBN 978-1-55,571-698-1. Storia del Comandante Libero. Vita Uccisione e Damnatio Memoriae del Fondatore della Brigata Partigiana Romagnola, Giorgio Fedel. Fondazione Comandante Libero, Milano, 2013. ISBN 978-88-9006-018-2-8. Edizioni Critica del Rapporto Taberi, Nicola Fedel. Rita Picali, Fondazione Comandante Libero, Milano, 2014. Riccardo Fedel Foundation, www.ricardofedel.org.